The Pacers draft has sat and marinated for a few days. How does it all impact the Pacers roster? What's their new cap situation? How do their players kind of slot in? What can they do in free agency? And who are the winners and losers on the team based on the Pacers picks? We'll get to all of it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're going to round out our draft coverage, kind of transition into free agency by talking about how the Pacers draft impacts their team, right? Who are the winners and losers on the roster based on the Pacers picks? Whose life got better or worse? Also, what's the Pacers' new roster situation, their new salary cap situation? Has that set up their financials this summer? Because we have all those details now. I was always very hesitant to speak with much absolutes on that, but now it's a lot easier with the picks made, right? They move from 7 to 8. That matters. They trade away 29. This all matters for their future. We'll cover all of that today. Later this week, we'll have an interview with one of Jarace Walker's high school coaches on this show, which should be pretty sweet to round out draft coverage. And then the rest of the week, it's all free agency talk. We'll do the rumors. We'll preview free agency, everything that you want to know about the Pacers. And of course, tomorrow, what I consider the biggest Pacers free agency topic, Tyrese Halliburton's extension. Everything you need to know with Yossi Goslin, my favorite cap guy, coming tomorrow. One of my favorite cap guys. He might be my favorite cap guy. There's a bunch of them. Anyway, let's talk about the Pacers draft and its impact on the roster. And I think the place to start is actually with some news. And that's that Mojave King, the 47th overall pick they just had, is a drafting stash. Derek Kramer of iPacers blog, friend of the pod, who's been on multiple times, first to report that. Dustin Dopirak from the Indy Star confirming it later in the day via his sources as well. So Mojave King is a drafting stash. We don't know where he's going to play. That has not been announced. Perhaps the Australian League, where he's played before. Perhaps somewhere else. He was with the Ignite last year, obviously, but that suggests he won't be with the team next year. So that is important to calculate, and that they'll keep his draft rights. So if he signs overseas, the Pacers can add him later, depending on when his contract expires. All that to say, now we know the Pacers currently have their 12 standard contracts, the same 12 they had before the draft, right? Miles Turner, Jalen Smith, Isaiah Jackson, Daniel Tice, Jordan Nwora, Aaron Nesmith, Chris Duarte, Ben Mathurin, Buddy Hield, Tyrese Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, and TJ McConnell. Those 12 still under contract. They also have their 2 new draft picks of Jarace Walker and Ben Shepherd, who are guaranteed to be on standard NBA deals as of right now. Now, those guys could be traded, obviously, but their contract is still the same. That's 14 guys on standard contracts. That's important to note from this draft because the max a team can have is 15. So perhaps the Pacers are planning on only signing one player in free agency. They did trade away a first-round draft pick for a future first-round picks. They still have a spot to do that. Their team would make sense if they just signed a really talented 3 or 4, but I don't know that that's all they'll do. We'll see. There could be moves to be made. There could not be. I'm not going to predict anything, but just from a roster perspective, that's kind of the big shake of the draft is they made more picks than I thought. If you remember on the draft preview show with Derek, we talked about what's the ideal number of rookies. I guessed fewer than they actually ended up picking. But even with King as a stash, that's closer to what I thought. But either way, they're still in this situation now where they'll have to figure out some stuff this week. If they only want to sign one player, they're in a perfect position, but that's their roster situation. They got 14 players in the mix once their first-round picks ultimately do sign, which could happen starting on July 1. Now, the fallout here, the key fallout from the Mojave King thing, and the reason I led with it is they only have one two-way guy agreed to as of now, and that's Oscar Tshiebwe, the Kentucky forward. We talked about this on Saturday's bonus podcast that he sources tell me he's agreeing to a two-way with the team. He announced it on his own Twitter, like that's set in stone. So he's on a two-way, and the Pacers can have 3 two-ways this year. So that's why Mojave King being a stash is crucial, because I was really curious when Tshiebwe got out that who's it going to be between Wong, King, and maybe Kendall Brown, who the Pacers have said they potentially would like to retain. Kevin Pritchard said that in his end-of-season presser. Well, with King out of the mix, that makes it much easier. To me, it's mostly clear that it will be those three guys I just said: Isaiah Wong, who they picked 55th, Kendall Brown, who they picked 48th last year, and Shibwe. Jermaine Samuels, I've seen him around a few times. I guess maybe he's in the mix, but maybe something else surprising could happen. But that seems like the most likely outcome to me, based on just the team's construction, how they picked guys, how they valued their assets. Just various stuff that's kind of come out since the draft. And that would mean that the Pacers' two-way spots are set as well. So they still would just have the one roster spot. They could fill out their camp up to 21 guys. So count those 14 plus the 3, that's 17. So they could sign a seriously good player and then sign 3 Exhibit 10 guys still. We haven't heard any Exhibit 10 leaks from this Pacers team yet, just some Summer League guys, so we'll see where that all kind of shakes out. I think Summer League could be a time for the Pacers to snag up some of those guys, but we'll see how this all pans out, and maybe you don't see those two-way signed until later in the Summer League process. Either way, that's their roster situation right now, and the Mojave King news, critically important to all that and how the team kind of balances out what it will look like going forward with the draft now complete. Now, the other part of changing stuff around with your picks is your salary cap situation. This was another thing I was always very hesitant to talk about before. And there's a couple things that have happened both around the draft and since the draft that matter for the Pacers cap situation. So they traded away pick 29, which would have carried a cap hit this year, or a rookie scale deal this year. That is off the books from the last time I talked about the Pacers cap situation about a month ago at the end of May. Jarris Walker, they picked him at 8th instead of 7th. That's a little cheaper, right? So that clears up a little space for the Pacers as well. Second round picks don't carry anything until they're actually signed anymore. And then also the salary cap went up. Now, I had estimated on my sheets that the cap would go up the maximum amount next season. And hey, guess what? The league told teams that's probably going to happen. So salary cap likely going to be the max it can be this coming season, just over $136 million. Teams apparently got a memo about that last week. I forget who reported it. It's either Shams or Woj, who report mostly everything these days. Anywhoomst, all of those things added up. Walker being picked one pick later, the increase of the cap, the trading away of pick 29 means that as of right now, let me give you two numbers. Okay, the first one, don't freak out. It's going to be lower than you think, and then I'll explain. As of right this second, I think the Pacers are going to have about $17 million of space, but that's including their cap holds, and all of their cap holds are pointless. They have a cap hold for George Hill, O'Shea Brissett, James Johnson, and their two-way guys on their books, and they don't need it. They don't need any of those because none of those guys, they don't need their free agency rights to re-sign them. They have the cap space to keep them in all of those cases. So I guess you'd keep George Hills for some silly sign-and-trade scenarios if that comes to that, and they won't cut a cap hold until they have to. But if they slashed all their relevant cap holds, the Pacers, this is the number that actually matters and the one that fans should talk about with free agency on the horizon, $32 million in cap space. I think that's the number I will be using and referring to in this coming week, and the number that roughly the Pacers can operate with. They can get more by trading away players, certainly. That's probably the only way at this stage, though. And if they sign a second-round pick, Isaiah Wong, to a deal that isn't a two-way, that would also cut into their space. But assuming the two-way stuff is structured the way I said earlier, and they do not keep any of the cap holds of those 5 players that are their free agents this summer, $32 million in space is the number. Now, the cap is big. I don't think people realize how big the cap is when they talk about contracts and what players are worth. The third center for the Timberwolves, Naz Reid. He's very good, by the way. This is not a knock on Naz Reid. Got $14 million a year. Like, key depth pieces that play in the mid-20s to lower minutes per game are still going to get mid-level exception or bigger contracts that look big, but they're not in the new salary cap land space. I say that to say the 25% maximum for players with 0 to 6 years of service in the NBA right this coming season is going to be more than the Pacers space. Barely, right? It's not a lot different. Like a 25% of $136 million is about 32. It's closer to 35, but the Pacers are close to a 25% max, but they don't have it. And they definitely don't have the 30% max or the 35% maximum max. That is a sentence. In free agency. So they do not have max cap space. They'd have to trade away a player to get there. But they have a lot, and they can feasibly sign several talented free agents with $32 million in space. But the salary cap, again, you got to catch up to the new numbers because as it goes up 10% a year, which is great news for the NBA and its growth, that does mean that some of these contracts are going to look bigger than they really are. And from a percentage of the cap perspective, that is what more matters as the cap continues to grow. Let's talk about the winners and losers who are currently on the Pacers from what the Pacers did on draft night, bringing in Jarris Walker, bringing in Ben Shepherd, drafting Isaiah Wong. Who wins? Who loses? We'll do winners first because we're feeling nice here on Locked On Pacers today. Before we talk about those winners, though, I want to talk to you guys about eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or get your money back, because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. eBay's guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. Locked On Wolves, I already mentioned it. Naz Reid back with Minnesota. Good player. And a fun offseason coming in Minnesota. I'll be very curious what they do to improve after they made an insane trade last summer. Regardless of how you feel about it, I think trading that many picks is insane just as an adjective to describe it. I don't think it was necessarily as bad as some people painted it out to be, although it could be. We'll see. Either way, let's talk more about the Pacers, their draft, what it means for their team going forward. Winners and losers, right? Lots of players are watching. What's the team I'm on going to do? What does it mean for my role, my minutes, my chances going forward? I think there's more losers than winners on the Pacers, or at least in the free agency landscape for the Pacers, but that's mostly just because of the way their roster is structured, because they needed forwards so bad and they had so few forwards that it's a little harder for there to be winners than losers, just given their roster structure. That's not a knock on anything they did. It's just how this is going to be set up. I have a biggest winner for the Pacers on their team from this draft. That's Aaron Nesmith. Aaron Nesmith is a humongous winner. Why? Pacers did not trade for a 3, and they didn't draft a 3, right? He is still on their team. Like, if you type out their depth chart and put everybody in their spots, right? Halbert, Nembhard, and McConnell as your 1s. Mathurin, Hield, and Shepherd as your 2s. And Jarris Walker and Jordan Nwora as your 4s. And Turner, Smith, Jackson, Tyson, Tshiebwe as your 5s. He's still the starting 3. Duarte right behind him. Move guys to whatever position you feel like could be a little different, and maybe you think Hield or Mathurin could start at the 3. That's fine. I think that would actually be smart. Or something else could change, but either way, the Pacers not acquiring another 3 means there's almost certainly a role for Aaron Nesmith on the Pacers next year. Even if they add another forward, he's still probably in the mix for minutes next season. Had they drafted and traded for a solid forward, he might have been right on the fringe of minutes, just given what the Pacers roster would have looked like at that time, and given their goals of potentially, Mathurin talked about starting maybe on the wing on ESPN2. Sky Agnes had that write-up. I didn't actually see that myself, but in Fieldhouse Files, you can check that out. Like, he's a big winner. They didn't add anyone in front of him. There's a likely role for him, and the Pacers, a team that stunk on defense last year, he's probably their best wing defender on their team. Maybe Jarris Walker can supersede him right away. That's totally possible. But as of right now, before free agency, and this could totally change in free agency, Aaron Nesmith, a big winner from the Pacers draft, maybe the biggest one on the team. And hey, that dude's up for a rookie extension this summer and is a free agent next summer, albeit restricted. He's probably very happy that this shook out the way it did for him heading into this season. And none of that's bad, right? I'm not saying that him having a big chance before free agency is bad. If he plays well and the Pacers need to pay him to keep him, great. That means he played well. So he is my biggest winner. On a similar breath and vein, these two players who I'm about to say could both be viewed as winners and losers. And I'll explain the winners side of it in this segment, but also talk about them in the next segment similarly. And that's Chris Duarte and Jordan Nwora. And that's if you think they can or should play at the 3 for the Pacers next year, because once again, they did not draft 3s. I think Chris Duarte is a wing. He can play the wing. He's got the size to do it. He guarded wings a lot his rookie year. I think people have kind of forgotten that happened, by the way. Like, certainly his offensive palette and skill set kind of can be a 2, and he plays off the ball and can be that kind of guard. But I think that he defends threes enough that I easily call him a wing in my head. And he's 6'6". Like, he's definitely tall enough to do it. So if you view him as a 3, perhaps them not trading for or drafting anyone who's naturally a 3 or has an obvious path to minutes at the 3 is significant. Maybe you view Ben Shepherd as a 3, but I would play Chris Duarte over Ben Shepherd, especially this coming season. So it's fairly easy to see how he could be viewed as a winner, but I will explain in the next segment how he could also be a loser. Same applies to Jordan Nwora. He played 4 for this Pacers team last year. If he plays 4 this coming season, it's very obvious, I'll say it in the next segment, how he'd be a loser from their draft. But if he can play the 3 some, and I think if you can shoot it, you can really play any forward position at his height, then yeah, he could be a winner. There could be more avenues for him to play as a reserve next season in that way. The Pacers forward rotation is going to be very tricky to kind of map out and figure out after who they sign, whatever they do in free agency, whoever they sign fits in, if they sign a forward. I presume they will. And Jarris Walker being in the mix now, and like Carlisle has played his good rookies about 26 to 28 minutes since being in charge of the Pacers. Like, how does this all balance out? It's going to be fascinating to figure out. But if any of those 3 guys I just said, Nesmith, Nwora, and Duarte, if you view them as a 3 for the Pacers next season, they're big winners from the draft. If you view any of them as 2s or 4s, not so much, because they drafted a 2 and a 4. So those are the biggest winners to me. Now, here's a lazy one, but I wanted to get this in there. Everyone is a winner because the Pacers have a 4 who can defend, and that's going to clean up so many guys playing out of position and being overmatched at times. They went to so many 4-guard lineups last year. Turner had to guard different positions because the guy next to him was tiny sometimes. The tiny players could not defend 4s, and so that was a defensive breakdown that caused other guys to have to do more on the defensive end, so they couldn't guard their yard as well. That leads to you get how it all fits together. Having a natural 4 on the team who maybe he won't be a great defender right away. In fact, usually defense is where rookies struggle the most as rookies. But we'll see how Jarris Walker does. He's obviously a very talented team defender already. Anywho, if he is a decent defender right away, which he could be, he's got the size to do it. He's built like a linebacker. I have a whole story on that on Pacers SI. If he does fit in right away, and him helping on defense at any time in the next 3 years is a win for anybody, that's huge for everybody. It's going to make their jobs easier on defense. It's going to make the Pacers better on defense, and they've needed that since Thad Young. I mean, I wrote this in my story, and I'll just include this for context of why everybody's a winner, because they have a defensive 4. Here are the starting power forwards the Pacers have had for more than like a random small game sample since Thad Young signed with the Bulls in 2019, right? He was their starting 4 the years before, was solid on both ends of the floor. It was Sabonis. He's a 5, obviously. He's a very good player, to be clear. He's just a 5. He's not a 4. Sabonis, Justin Holiday, after they traded Sabonis, although they also traded Justin Holiday, but whatever. Justin Holiday started some. Turner was hurt a lot that year. Jalen Smith to start this past season, and Aaron Nesmith, who is not a 4. Right? They've just never had a guy who's naturally that spot in that spot. And so Walker filling in, he is naturally a 4. He can do so many things that the Pacers have needed. Everybody's going to win from that. Everybody's going to be better off because they're playing their own position. They can fit in better. They're not going to be covering for each other as much. Even if he struggles as a rookie, just his imposing size alone should help. It's a little bit lazy to say this, but everybody is a little bit of a winner from that. Now, the losers list is a little longer, especially because free agents are involved on this side, and there's some depth stuff going on. Well, you'll see, but I think there's some losers on the team who are not as thrilled minutes-wise from what the Pacers did on draft night. We'll cover those to close out today's show. Spoiler again, it's kind of a lot. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Suns. Why? DeAndre Ayton talk, nearly a Pacer last year, because it has now been reported by Chris Haynes and a couple other Suns insiders down in Phoenix that they're not trading Ayton, which is a little bit of a surprise to me, but I get why. He's good. The Pacers wanted him last year, obviously, and Brendan Clean will have more on Locked On Suns about the Suns' next steps of team building, what they can do with Ayton, all sorts of stuff. He's killing it covering that team. Let's talk about the losers on the Pacers roster who looked at the draft and went, dang, and what that means for their future or the Pacers' future in general. We'll start at the 2-guard spot. Ben Sheppard, look, 26 picks aren't going to play as rookies. I'm not going to pretend like Ben Sheppard's going to come in and be in the rotation this year. I don't think anybody thinks that. I don't even know if Ben Sheppard thinks that. But what I do think is they have another option in the rotation at that position long term. And he's a shooter who they said maybe in a pinch you can play the point guard. And if you can shoot, you can play the three. And he's 6'6", so he could play a lot of positions. He's got the skills that Carlisle likes with the shooting and the versatility. We'll see how much he plays this coming season. Either way, if you're a 2 who doesn't have a rock-solid future at the Pacers, you're not thrilled that they have another 2 in the mix. So, Buddy Hield, who, if he's on the team next year, certainly in the rotation, no doubt. I don't think his playing time this coming season is impacted in the slightest. His contract just has 1 year left. Could be a loser from this because the chance he's not with the Pacers 1 calendar year from now, even if it's a small amount, went down ever so slightly because Ben Sheppard is now in the mix. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with Buddy Hield. He's very tight with Halliburton. He's a very good player. He's one of the best shooters in the NBA. But his chances of sticking long-term, I think, went down just a tiny bit from the Ben Sheppard pick. And I put Duarte/Hield here, and the reasoning was in parentheses for just so you guys can see my notes. Just say, hello, Ben Sheppard. Duarte, I talked about this in the winner segment. If you view him as a 3, he's a winner. If you view him as a 2, not so much because Ben Sheppard's now in the mix. And another down year from Duarte, you could easily say, hey, let's try Ben Sheppard instead. So he's got someone on his back now, which could be good. Maybe that pushes him. But also a guy that he goes, I got to, if I don't play well, he's playing instead of me. Like that could be viewed as a negative for him and his playing time going forward. I would play Duarte over Ben Sheppard this season, to be totally clear. But there is reason to think about what that could mean for him. A loser, potentially. We'll see 2 free agents at the same position. Gabe York, for sure, is a loser here. Any chance Gabe York had of coming back was basically as point guard depth on a 2-way, right? They don't have a roster spot for Gabe York. They only have 1 roster spot. I mean, Gabe York wasn't going to likely get one anyway, but now that they only have 1 roster spot, it's even less likely. But he could have gotten another 2-way slot. He's still eligible for it. And teams always like having point guard depth. And the Pacers drafted a point guard, perhaps for that reason in mind. But the fact that they drafted a point guard who makes the most sense to have on a 2-way, especially being picked at pick 55 in Isaiah Wong, I think that bodes extremely poorly for Gabe York's chances of being re-signed to a deal come July when the season flips over. He could be back with the Mad Ants again. I have not checked in on what his G League contract length is right now, but I would say Isaiah Wong decreases the chances basically down to 0, pretty close, that Gabe York signs anything with this team in free agency this summer, maybe again late next season for the 3rd year in a row, but right now, very low. George Hill, maybe this is lesser the case because he's more so vet than 1, right? The Pacers would not sign George Hill because they love what he can provide at the point guard. They would sign George Hill because he's an awesome veteran and has a ton of ties to the franchise, but by adding Wong, they have 4 point guards now. I mean, Halliburton, Nembhard, McConnell, and Wong is 4. And maybe the Pacers view Wong as a 2 or something. I could just be totally off base here. I think of him as a 1 a little bit, although his passing numbers are not that significant. Either way, he's a tinier guard. So George Hill's chances of being the vet chosen for the Pacers, if they want to retain a vet this coming season between George Hill and James Johnson, I've thought it made sense for them to retain one of those guys. They're still a young team. Perhaps they just don't keep either. Either way, the chances George Hill is retained, perhaps like Buddy Hield here, this is just a slight one, but slightly decreased, even if it's ever so slightly. So that makes him a slight loser, although I don't know if there's much correlation here. I was just looking at the positions in that one. This one also could be fairly minor. Actually, let's do Wara first, right? I talked about how he could be a winner and a loser. Look, the obvious one here is I think he's a 4. He played the 4 a lot for the Pacers last year, and at his size, that makes the most sense there, although he can play the 3. If you view Jordan Wara as a 4, bad night for him. Jarris Walker's now on the team. He slides down a spot in the rotation already, and if they sign a 3-4 who could also be playing perhaps ahead of Walker or with Walker in the forward rotation, maybe that means Nesmith to back up 4. Maybe that just opens up opportunities for Wara to either be out of the rotation or playing far less. The fact that they picked Walker, there's very little argument that Jordan Wara should play over Jarris Walker this coming season, even though he's a fantastic offensive fit with the Pacers. He was great for them to close last season. So even though, again, he was great to close last season for them, he's a big loser. And that's tough because he's got free agency coming up next year, but he can really shoot it. He can really score. He's a good offensive fit. We'll see what the Pacers think of him going into next year, but Jarris Walker being picked certainly hurts his minutes and his opportunities with this team, unless they view him more as a 3, and then they've got the Nesmith-Wara duo and Duarte. There's a lot of nebulous going on there. Either way, I would consider Wara a loser, but I would understand someone who views him as a winner if they think he can play a lot more 3. Speaking of losers, me. Anyway, that was a stupid joke. I talked about Gabe York being hit hard because of Isaiah Wong potentially joining on a 2-way. Drafting a 4 in Walker and still having Wara on the team and drafting 2 players, meaning they only have 1 roster spot. Put that all together, and it spells a bad night for O'Shea Brissett's chances of returning to the team. They don't need depth at the 4 as bad anymore. James Johnson could be thrown in this mix as well, honestly. But they don't need depth at the 4 as much anymore, and they don't have a ton of spots to bring back someone like Brissett. So I would consider him a loser in that way. I mean, if he's willing to take a tiny deal, perhaps the Pacers will have him back anyway. But there's just a crunch going on for this team, and they've admitted it a lot because they have to. But it's very easy to say that they need to figure something out and perhaps make another minor move. But O'Shea Brissett, his chance of returning to the Pacers certainly decreased. And if he does, the chance he would play at all is way, way, way down. So he's a loser from this exchange as well. I don't doubt that he'll find a home in the NBA next year, but the odds it's with the Pacers went from kind of low to really low to me, given how the Pacers draft went. The final loser for the Pacers, this is a bit of a reach, even I'll admit it. I put it in my notes that this is maybe a reach. Maybe a backup big or 2 for the Pacers. They brought in Shibwe, which is interesting. That dude can rebound the ball. Holy moly. It's funny, I watched 1 full Kentucky game from last year, so take this with a grain of salt. But I just wanted to get a feel for what he does, and the answer is just grab everything that bounces off the rim. He averaged almost 14 a game this past season and 15 per game as a junior with the Wildcats. If he's on that 2-way with the Pacers this year, perhaps that puts some pressure on the team to say, we don't need as much depth at the big spots, right? We don't need 3 backup centers to Miles Turner. We might only need 2 because we have Oscar waiting in the fold to play some minutes if we're in a total pinch with injuries. So, the chances of a trade involving Jalen Smith or Isaiah Jackson or Daniel Tice probably went up a tiny, tiny bit for those guys. So a little more losers, but a lot of it's kind of related to free agency, which doesn't count as much because those guys aren't on the team. I would say the actual on-the-roster winners and losers number is pretty balanced. But to me, the biggest winner certainly is Aaron Nesmith. I think he's going to be the guy who's the happiest with how this turned out for him, his opportunities this coming season. And if you listen to the season reviews I did with Caitlin Cooper, where we ran through every player on the team, we kind of discussed, if the Pacers draft a 4 and sign a 4, who would you think could be the back guy of the rotation between Nesmith and Wara? Because there might just not be minutes for absolutely everybody that they want to play. We both picked Nesmith, so it's likely he would have had a role anyway, but now the chances it's at least a decent to significantly sized role in the at least 15 minutes per game range went way up, which is big for him. I think he earned it. He had a good season for the Pacers last year. And then the losers are obviously the guys at the positions that were drafted or signed to, and any of the free agents in those spots as well. Let me know what you guys think. Who do you think is a big winner or big loser for the Pacers from this draft? Tweet at me at Tony R. East. I have a lot of tweets up about the draft. I apologize for how much I've been tweeting recently, but a lot of info to share and a lot of fever stuff going on. Congrats to Aaliyah Boston, WNBA All-Star starter. She's so good. And if you're watching on YouTube, back with the fancy graphics finally. It was a busy weekend, so I apologize for not making them for the last 2 episodes. But either way, comment below. Big winners and losers from the draft. We'll be back tomorrow, like I said, talking about what I view as the biggest Pacers story of their free agency period, the Tyrese Haliburton rookie extension. What can they agree to, if anything? What are the parameters around it? What makes sense for the Pacers to offer? What will Haliburton want in his ideal world, in theory, as a player who would like to make lots of money playing basketball? We'll get to all that tomorrow. And then we'll talk, like I said, with Jarris Walker's high school coach. And then 3 straight days, well, really way more than that, a free agency talk, probably a bonus episode coming this week as well, just given the day that free agency starts being Friday. So we'll do Saturday shows. And then before you know it and blink, the week after that, summer league starts. I'll be there most likely, so you should get a lot of content about the summer Pacers, Jarris Walker's debut with the team, Ben Shepherd's debut, Isaiah Wong's debut, everything you would want to know about the Pacers as this offseason develops. It's all coming here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Thanks for being an everydayer and listening as often as you can. Hope everybody had a fantastic weekend. We will see you tomorrow.